Okay, let's talk spawns. We're going to do this while shooting bots, because shooting bots is one of the best ways to learn anything in Halo Infinite. So if you don't already do this, I highly recommend you shoot some bots. But specifically in Academy, there's a unique feature where I can turn enemy outline, enemy location on, which lets me see them through walls. I can also take off their shooting, their grenade ability, so they're just a mobile firing range. Basically, the convenience of this is when I kill this player, the instant that he spawns, I will see where he spawns, which I assume will be somewhere over in A, yeah, in this moment. So before we jump into the specifics of this, let's just get some ground rules out. First off, where do players spawn? In case you don't already know, players spawn in the outer perimeter of every map. If you think of a map like a pizza, players spawn in the crust. Shout out to Halo coach Callus for the tasty analogy. They can spawn in a pepperoni too, for the record. It's possible for a player to occasionally, very rarely, spawn in the middle of a map. But this only happens in special case scenarios where either all the spawns on the map are blocked and it's forced to spawn him here, or if so much of the action is happening on the other end of the map, like if everyone's in A, let's say, and the game feels safe in putting me closer to that action in the middle of the map, that can, result in a mid-map spawn as well. So you'll see this on live fire where I was just standing. On recharge, it's possible to spawn in bottom mid, but it's so rare and so unpredictable as to when it happens, then it's not something I would rely on. I would just say outer perimeter is where you'd expect spawns, minus high ground positions and overexposed power positions on the map. So you won't spawn directly on top tower. You will spawn on the shoulder, like the arm and the stairs here. You won't spawn directly on top of nest. You'll spawn beside nest in mud or on the other side in the training boxes. So kind of omitting the power positions, outer perimeter of every map. Next, what influences spawns? There's a handful of things that influence spawns in Halo Infinite to varying degrees. The most important one that you want to keep in mind is just players on the map. Both enemy and friendly Spartans have the highest influence over where other Spartans will spawn. I'll say specifically enemies. The enemy, I'd say, has the single highest influence on where spawns happen. So you can flip that and say that my teammates have the greatest influence over where the enemies on the map will spawn. So that's why it's so important to pay attention to the location of your teammates, because they have the highest influence on where those enemy players will spawn. Typically, your opponents will spawn directly opposite where you and your team is. So if we're skewed towards the OS side of the map, then the open area would be the B. Towards mud side of the map would be kind of where you'd expect to spawn. But on the other side of the coin here, you have the team influence of spawns as well. Your teammates have a high influence on where you will spawn on the map. Also, if your teammate is not under too much pressure from an enemy, then you'll spawn near that teammate, even if that position of the spawn might not be the farthest, possible point away from the enemy in that moment. Your teammate has an influence over your spawn point. If it feels that it's safe in that moment to spawn you near that teammate, then you'll team spawn near your teammate. So essentially, the spawn system, for the most part, is kind of like a tug-of-war, like a push and pull between enemy influence and team influence. And then I guess the degree to which those influences affect the final spawn location sort of varies from map to map and situation to situation. So what I mean to say is, because I'm here in A, I'm putting too much pressure on this player for the team spawn influence to team spawn anybody near this player. My presence here is superseding the team spawn influence, if that makes sense. Instead, it's going to flip that spawner to somewhere else where it's safer on the map. They probably spawned in B and then walked out, right? The team spawn happened over on B. The reverse of that would be if I back up a little bit, now they're going to start team spawning on that teammate, right? Even though I'm sort of looking in this general vicinity, because the team spawn influence is weighted higher, I guess, in this moment, it's still thinking, the spawn system's thinking it's safe to team spawn somebody, over in that location in the back of A. So it really comes down to whether or not I took a few steps forward and started putting shots into that player for the spawn system to say, okay, it's unsafe. We're going to flip the spawn, right? So it's kind of a tug-of-war between the two, and some maps have a higher influence, team influence by default. So a map like Aquarius, for example, tends to have a very high team influence, and that's something we'll see later. First, though, something interesting about Halo Infinite spawn system is if I take all players off the map except one, so we make it a 1v1, and then I kill this player's spawn location will be randomized in the open available perimeter of the map, the farthest open perimeter of the map. So we can see that first spawn location was in A towards Big Door, which is farthest kind of away from me. So, obviously open space for him. But if I go stand in the same location, his next spawn point will it will probably not be the same place. It'll be, it'll be back B this time. It's something else. And if I kill him again, the spawn will probably be somewhere new. The spawn system is either completely random if there's one player on the map, or it works on some sort of a rotation. There he's in back A now on the left side of A, but I've been standing in the same, general vicinity every single time and getting different results. This is very different than other Halo games. Other Halo games, especially a game like, let's say, Halo 5, if you were to stand in a specific location and look a specific direction, the spawn that you would get would be the exact same spawn for your enemy every single time. And that was a strategy in Halo 5, and it's something that worked even all the way up to 4s, is, if you were standing in specific locations, you could expect reliable spawn points. And Infinite has some sort of a built-in mechanic where it doesn't like to spawn the same player in the same location twice unless it absolutely has to, and there's no other option for where they can spawn, which we've seen it happen before. If you take a look at, like, Solitude, for example, at Arlington, spawning players in Cafe over and over and over again. The way that they're blocking the map, there's no other available space for those players to spawn. They'll continue to spawn in Cafe. But if the spawn system has an option to spawn that player somewhere else, it will choose to rotate. So this is like a built-in mechanic that 343, I guess, added maybe to balance the spawn system, which is sort of good to keep in mind, right? Like when you have just killed a group of players in B and both A and B are open, then you would know without a doubt that A would be your next spawn just based off of that tendency of the spawn system and how it likes to rotate, even if B is technically still open. On top of the fact that other things can influence spawns as well, like player sight lines. If you have a sight line directly on a spawn, that will prevent that spawn from happening in that specific spot that you're looking. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to flip the spawn entirely with your sight line, but it will, prevent the spawn system from spawning a player directly within your sight line in that moment. In general, spawns will try to happen behind cover, like behind this pillar right here, to stay out of your sight line, but sight lines do have an impact. Your gunfire and your nades on their own, I believe, do not have an impact on spawn location, though, interestingly. So if you were to throw a nade into a spawn, I've seen so many situations where players have spawned directly on top of nades. Like if they have an influence, it's very, very minor and insignificant because, man, spawning on nades is a real thing. The last thing to keep in mind before we put this to the test is OBJ-specific spawn influences. So the oddball, for example, does have a negative influence over players' spawn points. So if the oddball is sitting in a perimeter of the map, players generally won't spawn on top of the oddball because it has a negative influence. It doesn't want players spawning on top of it unless all other spawns are blocked and it has no other choice. In a game mode like CTF, spawns are specifically on your half of the map, right? This is unique to capture the flag. You can only spawn on your half of the map all the way up to the center 50-yard line. So in Aquarius, for example, players will spawn on P1. They can spawn on Car 2. In Argyle, you can spawn all the way up to mid-ramp over on the main ramps if the game feels that it's like unsafe to, spawn a player in the back of the base. There's too many players or too much pressure over towards the back of the base. So it makes spawns easier to predict in CTF because you know that they're static to one side of the map. Back in Extraction, I think the Extraction point actually had a negative spawn influence as well, which is part of the reason why Extraction was such a disliked game type. Because if you think about it, when you put the point down to convert it, and then everybody on the team just spreads out to protect it and control, areas of the map, the point itself is doing some of that spawn control just by being there, right? So it's almost like having a fifth man on the map and really limiting the space and the spawn options for their opponents, which is what made it so difficult to come back. One of the things that made it difficult to come back in that game type was its spawn influence, but, no need to worry about that anymore. Hills themselves, by the way, I believe do not have any influence over where players can spawn. So in Strongholds, in King of the Hill, the presence of a hill being there, I do not think influences the spawn in any way. I've seen players spawn directly beside, or I don't think you can spawn on top of a hill necessarily, but you can spawn beside it, no problem. One interesting thing about these game types, though, is that the number of spawn points can actually vary from game type to game type. For example, I saw a tweet from Total Legend recently saying that on Solitude, apparently there's 15 additional spawn points, bottom mid, out of 72 total that were turned off in Strongholds, but are turned on in King of the Hill and Slayer, which is interestingly, this is the kind of knowledge that you think game developers would want to arm their players with so they could better understand, the game. But there are more spawn points in King of the Hill and Slayer on Solitude, I guess, specifically. The only way to actually see how many spawn points are on the map and where these spawn points are located would be to go into Forge for each one of these maps and count them out yourself. But even I'm not nerdy enough to try to figure all that out. Instead, the best way to learn spawns is just through experience and awareness and through an exercise like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run around the map and shoot these bots in Academy and then predict where I expect them to spawn based off of my teammates' locations. Right now, you can see they're spawning back tower, And that was the final one that was alive on B. They should all, based off team spawn influence, spawn back tower, because my teammates aren't close enough, putting enough pressure on them to prevent them from spawning out back tower. A couple things to keep in mind while we do this is the spawn time in Academy is faster than other game types. It's a 5-second spawn timer. The kill feed on screen stays on screen for 5 seconds. So you can see I killed Hollis. The moment that that disappears, the spawn happens in Academy. So Shady Seal, he's on the kill feed. The moment that disappears, Shady Seal will spawn probably somewhere in A towards Big Door or back B. Something else to know about the spawns is the spawns like to try to rotate and create space around the map if they have the opportunity to create space. So you can see how Hollis was in A in that moment, but his team spawn ended up happening out in back B. The spawn system has a tendency, kind of like a bounce back mechanic, to try to give your enemy team space up on the map. So that's something to keep in mind too. If both A and B are open in that situation, instead of spawning them all bunched up in one spot, the game will instead kind of push them out on the perimeter and kind of advance them on the map so that they can bounce back in the game a little bit more effectively, which is interesting and kind of controversial mechanic, I'll say, but it's something that you have to keep in mind if you want to control spawns at a high level. But this is all stuff to keep in mind when you do this kind of exercise. So let's continue. If I push out A here, and I kill these players in A, my teammates were skewed towards top mid, and they're front of B, so they're probably going to be back tower, right? With my teammate coming out the front of B here, that might add take some influence off of B, so all the spawns in this moment end up being back tower. Now that my teammates are in tower and pushed it out, the spawns should be over in either A or B. They're in A. And remember that the team influence is, kind of helping. It will at this point, now that this player spawned in A, the rest of them will be spawning and kind of forming that perimeter out in A here. So, dead. B is an open spawn right now, and highly likely as we get these kills, because that one player who is Big Door has pushed out. So you can see they're already spawning in B here. There they are in B. Kill this. One team spawned in B, which is interesting, right? That was that late team spawn right there. Can happen sometimes, even though I'm pushing up on B. That team spawn still influenced it. Now they're spawning A. They might flip tower here. We just killed them in B. We're rotating off of B now. So those first spawners, it could go back to B, but it might be back tower. Yeah, it makes sense. The spawn likes to rotate away from the action, right? So we were just coming off of B. We got kills in B. We were collapsing on A. So the next spawn is back tower. That's the safest area. Now that we're collapsing on tower, it could be back B now, unless my teammates are blocking it. Ritzy is kind of close, but look at the back B spawn still happening. But one split from back B and now started spawning back A because the system said, oh, Ritzy's here. This is not safe. So we're going to spawn the rest of them over in A, right? So it's just like learning to navigate this as you run around these maps in Academy and predict, and then be right with your prediction. The better that you understand this, and the more cleanly you can execute bots and fly around the map. Like every single component of this matters. Being able to hit your slides and quickly rotate around the map, being able to execute all your shots or throw your nades perfectly, especially considering we can see them through the wall, so I can prep my quick scope in the air like before I even come into the interaction. Like I've got all the advantages I would ever need to build very confident muscle memory around the mechanics of just like moving and shooting, navigating this map, and then learning spawns at the same time. Like you can really manipulate this to the point where you can start to create split spawns on purpose. So for example, this player's in A right now, he's dead. But like if I'm sitting here on Nest and my team is putting enough pressure on A in this moment, then that one player will split spawn out to dummies, assuming I have no teammates blocking dummies. And I'll show an example of like what that looks like. But basically, you'll start to see these patterns in game. Like you'll have teammates in the hill, in King of the Hill, and your teammates start pushing up on A. And you know that if you're standing Nest and your teammates start pushing A, it'll split the spawns out to dummies. So you turn, jump, and headshot the dummy spawner because you know that that's going to be there in that moment, because that's how the spawn system works. So you'll start to see patterns, and this is why you want to, play Academy to figure that out. So if you haven't tried this, I recommend you jump in Academy and give it a shot. Just turn the enemy outlines on, get some kills, and predict where their spawn location is going to be using your teammates' locations. We've got them in pink, in back, like pink and top mid. They should continue spawning over yellow util to yellow base. The spawn system likes to spread out, if it can, with that team influence, right? As I push up in util and kill these players, that spawn might come out to the fridge right now unless my teammate pushes out the fridge. There he is, in the fridge, because of the team influence. Because these other players are out mid-map, and they're already in gunfights. So no team spawn is going to happen on any of these players in mid-map. So you can just kind of continue to learn the tendencies of the spawn system using this mode. It's just the easiest way to do it. Yellow is the open spawn. These teams players are spawning on yellow around each other. As I push out yellow and get the kills, there's a high team influence here. There's a chance that the first kill that I get could end up spawning still in the util. But it could, especially considering there's a player in blue here. Yeah, yellow to util is the spawn, right? So the team influence created a spawn near this player, despite the fact that I'm like in a fight with him on top yellow. And that's also because my teammate's blocking the blue base right now, ensuring that the spawn happens there. So they're all going to continue to spawn here until we push it out. And then once we get these kills, they'll flip. Probably to yellow base is where that spawn's going to flip, assuming I can hit my shots and talk at the same time. There's the one kill. There's 2 dead. They will spawn yellow fridge or P side of the map. Makes sense. There he is, yellow fridge, right? We're skewed over to blue in the blue util. The map's going to try to give us a mirror effect, right? Flip it on the opposite side of the map from where we are all positioned. So util was the spot, or fridge was the spot. And remember to use all the little cues that I've talked about in my videos, like the kill feed, for example. Spawn time in Academy is 5 seconds. Spawn time in Ranked Slayer is 8 seconds, and 10 seconds in Ranked OBJ. So the kill feed is on screen for 5 seconds. Once it disappears, 3 seconds after that feed disappears, you get a spawn in Slayer. So 3 seconds after this is gone, you get a spawn in Slayer. The instant it disappears, you get the spawn in Academy. And then 5 seconds after it's gone, you get the spawn in OBJ. You can use that to kind of time it in your head. You can use your scoreboard, bring up your scoreboard to see who's dead and who's alive. That takes a little bit longer. It's good to be able to quickly process your kill feed and quickly process where your teammates are, so you can kind of identify that potential spawner, like what's unsafe. Learn what's unsafe on the map based off your teammates' locations very quickly. The faster you can process that, the more aware you're going to be, the more prepared you're going to be in game. And you can also use the icons on the side of the screen as well. You got the blue icons that tell me that there are 3 blue players on my left-hand side. They could be back blue base. They could be over in the util on car side. If you see an exclamation point above one of those icons, it tells me that they are in an active gunfight. They're either shooting or getting shot at. That exclamation point is very important. It lets me like narrow down the options. If somebody's in a fight, that's 1 player accounted for, and some good awareness for me in my position on the map. So you're just kind of taking in all these cues off your team and doing that constantly in any moment of downtime, when you back down to reload, when you're dead, you know, like just getting all that information is so important. Because Halo is an information game, especially at the higher level, when you realize that everyone can hit all their shots, and the better team is the one that can more efficiently stay on top of this information and use it to perfectly time their gameplay. All that said, no matter how well you can read spawns in Halo, your understanding will likely never be perfect, because Halo Infinite's spawn system is just not perfect. There will likely always be questionable spawns and inconsistencies, unless they were to revert the system back to Halo 5, which in my opinion was more readable and more competitive, but that was a different game with different mechanics and different maps, so hard to say, but just due to the nature of all the variables at play here. I'll just cap off this discussion with this example from Snakebites. We got an interesting spawn situation here where Royal 2 is in C, Renegade is in Commando coming out of C, Snakebite is in B, shooting a player on Planters, along with Frosty, who's in A, shooting this player as well. They're covering a lot of the map. The only open available space for players to spawn right now is Cafe. That's the most logical place to expect players to spawn. On the right side of the map, there are no FaZe players in that location. So that's your expectation, and that's Snakebite and FaZe's expectation as they make this rotation here. But instead of a player spawning, you can see somebody's already in Cafe. So the spawn's already started in Cafe. The player spawns in back PD instead, right here, within the sight line of Snakebite. I agree with Snakebite in that this is an error. This spawn shouldn't have happened here. Something to keep in mind with the system, though, is that it decides where to spawn a player on the frame that the spawn happens. So in order for us to get a full picture of the situation, we'd have to go into theater, pause it at the frame the spawn happens, and see the location of all the FaZe members and where they are. Because Royal 2 rotating off C is rotating towards Pink Street in this moment. I don't have the POV to show it, but I saw a different angle of this separately. He's rotating towards Pink, and depending on how much he's pushed up on Pink on Cafe, he could flip the spawn by being there. It really comes down to the timing. The fact that him and Renegade are leaving C also would open up C, though, and I think the safest place to spawn this player based on the circumstances would have probably been back Ivy in the back corner, because that would have been farthest away from the action and the rotation of the players in this moment. But you have to think about things like team spawn influence. Like the fact that the teammate is here, you'd think would have influenced the spawn in Cafe, even if Royal 2 was pushing up. Did Royal 2 have a direct sightline on that spawn in the moment? It kind of is my question as well. Frosty's position in A technically does not block PD or Cafe just by being here. It depends on how much pressure he's putting on these two locations, and FaZe knows this, but Snakebite coming out from B and killing this player nearby, you really wouldn't expect to see a spawner here. So the thing is like, no matter how well you know the system, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we're going to guess everything perfectly. Just the nature of the way Halo plays, the map layouts, the sight lines, the pace of the game, the tendencies of the spawn system to want to create like a perimeter with players. How strong is the team influence versus the enemy influence? And when does it decide to flip a spawn? How does it decide where to flip the spawn, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that we can't really fully identify with the resources that we have. 343 also recently updated the spawn system. Turns out the Bandit Evo start has a different spawn influencer cone than the BR starts. I'm not 100% sure what that means. I think it has something to do with the optimal ranges of the weapons and how maybe their sightline creates an influence on where spawns happen based on the different ranges between the Evo and the BR, but they matched it so that the Bandit Evo is the same as the BR now, so the spawns are the same as they were back closer to launch, which weren't perfect to begin with. This example with Snakebite was from before the recent patch, so hopefully we'll see less of this. All in all, though, I think this is the most comprehensive spawn discussion I've ever done for any Halo game. So hopefully you guys found it informative. I think by now you should have a much better understanding of kind of how the system works and an exercise that you can use in Academy to try some things out yourself and learn the tendencies yourself. This is something that comes from my own understanding and experience with the game and conversations that I've had about the system. Obviously, I'm not a game developer. I don't know everything there is to know, so I'd like to hear your theories in the comments. If you got any theories in the comments. I'd like to also thank my Patreon, everybody on Patreon who's been contributing to support the channel. I appreciate you guys. It means a lot. I've got exclusive content that I've been putting up on Patreon as well. I put some of my coaching content up there and other experimental stuff that I plan to continue adding to. So if you want to help support the channel, get a little bit of extra content, feel free to check out the Patreon. But either way, I appreciate you guys for making it this far. If you did, I've got other videos right beside me. Check those out in the meantime. This is the way.